If you want to play a great pool, you need a perfect stroke. Spend just a few minutes online and you will find endless advice telling you exactly how your cue should move. But here is the thing, if there really was only one perfect stroke, then why don't the best players in the world use it? When coaches talk about the perfect pull stroke, they are talking about the stroke that is the easiest to repeat. If you freeze Joshua Filler at address, one thing immediately stands out. His bridge is unusually long. That alone changes the geometry of his stroke. With the cue supported like this, there is more room for a long backswing, but surprisingly, Filler does the exact opposite. His backswing is incredibly short and his follow-through is just as compact. To many coaches, that sounds like a recipe for inconsistency, but for him, it works the other way around. A shorter stroke means less moving parts, there's less distance for the cue to drift offline, fewer opportunities for the wrist or shoulder to interfere, and a naturally quicker rhythm. Instead of thinking about long flowing motion, Filler commits to the shot almost instantly. This style is incredibly effective when your timing is exceptional.
It's like I've seen this before.
His cue reaches maximum acceleration in a very short distance, making his stroke look explosive while still remaining remarkably controlled. It is one of the reasons he plays at such an incredible pace without sacrificing precision. But every advantage comes with a cost. Because the stroke is so compact, there is very little room for error. If your timing is even slightly off, you can't rely on a long acceleration zone to smooth things out. Under pressure, many players instinctively shorten their stroke even further, which often leads to steering the cue, pushing the cue ball, or decelerating into contact. In other words, what works brilliantly for Joshua Filler can quickly become a disaster for someone who doesn't possess his extraordinary timing. His stroke isn't successful because it is short. It's successful because his timing is almost perfect. And that's a crucial difference, because the next player proves something completely different. Instead of reducing movement, he embraces it. Chris Melling's stroke couldn't feel more different.
That's kind of secondary.
Where Filler is compact and explosive, Melling is fluid and rhythmic.
Oh, he did that.
His bridge is also quite long, but instead of using a short backswing, he allows the cue to travel much farther before changing direction.
Perfect.
The entire motion feels relaxed, almost effortless, as though the cue is swinging rather than being pushed. To some players, it even looks exaggerated, but that's exactly where its biggest strength lies. A deeper backswing gives you more time to feel the weight of the cue, more time to build acceleration naturally, and more freedom to produce a wide range of cue ball speeds without making the stroke feel rushed. For players with excellent rhythm, this creates an incredibly smooth delivery.
That's kind of secondary.
The cue isn't forced through the ball, it simply gathers momentum until contact happens almost by itself. But increasing movement also increases responsibility. A longer backswing means the cue spends more time in motion, creating more opportunities for tiny errors to appear. The cue can drift offline, the transition can become inconsistent, or the timing between the backswing and forward swing can break down. And these problems become even more noticeable under pressure. Many players who naturally use a long backswing unknowingly make it even longer when they are nervous. Instead of creating a smoother stroke, they begin chasing power, overthinking the transition, and losing the rhythm that made the stroke effective in the first place. That's why Melling's stroke isn't successful because it is long. It is successful because every part of that movement is governed by exceptional rhythm. And this brings us to perhaps the most interesting stroke of the three, because Fedor Gorst looks almost textbook until the moment after he strikes the cue ball. His bridge length is perfect, his backswing is controlled, his cue travels beautifully through the line of the shot, but then, as the cue passes through the cue ball, his elbow drops, sometimes much more than people expect. For years, players have been told that dropping the elbow is a technical mistake, so why does one of the most accurate players in the world do it? The key is when it happens. Gorst doesn't drop his elbow to hit the cue ball, he drops it after the critical moment of contact, allowing his arm to continue moving naturally, instead of stopping abruptly. Rather than fighting the body's mechanics, he lets the stroke finish on its own. This creates an exceptionally long relaxed follow-through, especially on power shots, where trying to keep the elbow frozen can introduce unnecessary tension. In other words, the elbow drop isn't creating the accuracy, it is allowing the stroke to stay fluid without sacrificing accuracy. Many amateurs see the elbow moving and immediately try to copy it, but the problem is that they start dropping the elbow before the cue reaches the cue ball. This changes the entire path of the cue, often causing the tip to rise, the cue to leave the intended line, and the contact point on the cue ball to shift ever so slightly. Those tiny differences may be invisible, but under pressure, they are often the difference between making the ball and rattling it. The lesson isn't that elbow drop is good, nor is that elbow drop is bad. The lesson is that timing changes everything. And once you compare all three players side by side, something fascinating begins to emerge. Despite looking completely different, they are actually relying on exactly the same principles. First of all, the cue is moving on the intended line at the exact moment of impact. Not necessarily throughout the entire stroke, but when it matters most. Secondly, their acceleration is smooth and deliberate. None of them jab at the cue ball or force the stroke at the last second. In the next step, their timing is extraordinarily consistent. Each player has repeated their unique stroke hundreds of thousands of times until it became automatic. And finally, the crucial aspect: they trust their movement. Under pressure, they aren't trying to build a better stroke, they are simply executing the one they have already mastered. And that's exactly the difference most players overlook. They are obsessed with copying what a professional stroke looks like, instead of understanding why it works. And that misunderstanding leads to one of the biggest mistakes amateur players make. They watch Joshua Filler and think,
maybe I should shorten my stroke.
Then they watch Chris Melling and think,
Actually, maybe I need a longer backswing.
and after watching Fedor Gorst, they start experimenting with elbow drop. The problem is copying the solution without understanding the problem it was solving. Every one of these pros has spent years refining a stroke that fits their body, their timing, and their feel for the game. Their movements didn't appear overnight. They evolved through thousands of hours of competition and adjustment. And most importantly, they understand the cost of their own technique. These aren't habits they perform blindly, they are controlled adaptations. Most amateurs don't have that awareness. Instead, They imitate what they can see while completely missing what they can't see. That's why copying a professional style rarely makes you play like a professional. More often, it simply gives you a more complicated version of your own mistakes, which brings us back to the question we asked at the very beginning. Does the perfect pull stroke actually exist? After looking at 3 of the best players in the world, I don't think the answer is as simple as yes or no. If by perfect you mean a stroke that looks identical for every player, then no, it doesn't exist. Joshua Filler proves that a remarkably compact stroke can dominate the highest level of competition. Chris Smelling proves that a long flowing stroke can be just as effective. And Fedor Gorst proves that even something as controversial as elbow drop isn't automatically a flow. But if by perfect you mean the stroke that gives most players the greatest chance of being consistent under pressure, then the textbook stroke is still the best place to start. Not because it is the only correct technique, but because it demands the fewest compromises. Every deviation from that model creates a trade-off. Sometimes you gain rhythm, sometimes you gain speed, sometimes you gain feel. But you almost always sacrifice something in return. The world's best players succeed not because they have broken the rules. They succeed because they understand exactly which rules they are breaking and why. So instead of asking yourself whose stroke should I copy, ask what makes a stroke repeatable under pressure. Because in the end, that's what separates good players from great ones. Not a perfect looking stroke, but a stroke they can trust when everything is on the line. And now, I would love to hear your opinion. Which of these 3 strokes surprised you the most? And if you had to borrow only one element, what would it be and why? If you are serious about improvement, I highly recommend checking out Pool Billiards CO. It is where you will find structured practice plans, advanced training tools, and a powerful table editor that lets you recreate and practice almost any situation you can imagine. If you use the link in the video description, you will also get an exclusive discount on a premium membership, so it is one of the best ways to turn random practice into purposeful improvement. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe, and see you in the next one. Take care.